The sound I remember most from that October afternoon is not Carol's voice. It is not the words she said, or the way she said them without any tremor of guilt or hesitation. It is the click of the lock, a small sound, a quiet sound, the kind of sound that ends one life and begins another, whether you are ready or not. I was 19 years old. My brother Cole was 16. We were standing on the cracked concrete porch of the only home we had ever known, holding everything we owned in 2 duffel bags, and that small mechanical click was the period at the end of a sentence that had been building for weeks, maybe longer. Maybe since the day our father first brought Carol home and she looked at us the way people look at furniture. They did not choose and cannot return. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it really starts. Not with Carol. Not with the lock. Let me start with my father. His name was Dennis Hale. He worked at a machine shop for 22 years. He was not a complicated man. He liked black coffee and baseball and the evening news, and he had a laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest and filled whatever room he was standing in. He was not perfect. He worked too much and talked too little, and sometimes he looked at Cole and me with an expression that was equal parts love and grief, because we had our mother's eyes, and our mother had been gone since Cole was 10, and I was 13. And I think seeing her in us every day was a joy and a wound he carried simultaneously, and never quite learned how to put down. He married Carol 2 years after our mother died. I understood it even then, in the limited way a 15-year-old can understand loneliness. He was a man who did not know how to be alone. Carol was organized and capable, and not unkind in those first months. She made dinner. She kept the house clean. She came to Cole's school events and sat in the bleachers with her hands folded in her lap, like a person performing the role of stepmother from a manual she had studied but not absorbed. She never loved us. That was not cruelty. It was simply the truth. Some people are not built for inherited children, and Carol was one of them. As long as our father was alive, that truth was manageable. He was the bridge between her world and ours. When he was gone, the bridge went with him. He died on a Tuesday in early October. A heart attack, sudden and complete, the kind that does not give warning and does not leave room for goodbyes. He was 54 years old. He was eating lunch at his workbench when it happened. A co-worker found him 20 minutes later. The funeral was small. A handful of men from the machine shop who shook our hands and said he was a good worker and a decent man, and meant every word. A few distant relatives who drove in from out of state and left before the food was gone. Carol wore black and stood very straight beside the casket, and her eyes stayed dry throughout the entire service. I remember noticing that. I remember filing it away somewhere in the back of my mind, alongside the real estate brochures I had started finding on the kitchen counter 2 days after the hospital called, and the way Carol had begun looking at Cole and me, not with hostility exactly, but with a kind of flat assessment, the way you look at a situation you were planning to resolve. Cole saw it too. He was 16 and grieving and trying not to show either, but he saw it. One evening he came and stood in the doorway of my room and said very quietly, "She is going to make us leave, isn't she?" And I said, "Probably yes." And he nodded and went back to his room. Neither of us cried about it. We had already used up a significant portion of our crying on our father and our mother before him. And somewhere along the way, we had both learned that tears were a resource, and you spent them carefully. 8 days after the funeral, on a Tuesday afternoon that mirrored the Tuesday our father died in a way that felt deliberate and almost theatrical. Cole and I came home from school, and Carol was standing at the front door. She did not invite us in. She held out a thin white envelope and said what she had clearly rehearsed. "Your father left everything to me. The house, the accounts, everything. Neither of you are named in the will." She paused. She had the look of someone who had anticipated an argument and prepared for it, which meant she was slightly unprepared for what actually happened, which was that I simply took the envelope, thanked her, and stepped back. Inside the envelope was $200. $200 and nothing else. That should be enough to get you started somewhere, she said. The door closed. The lock clicked. Cole and I stood on the porch for a moment that stretched in the way that only truly decisive moments do. The October wind cut through our jackets. The maple tree in the front yard was turning gold and red, beautiful and dying all at once, which felt appropriate. I opened the envelope and counted the bills. My jaw tightened. Not from anger, though the anger was there, banked low and steady like coals. It tightened because I was doing the math. The storage unit across town where we kept our mother's belongings cost $215 a month. Her photographs, her wedding dress, the quilt her grandmother had hand-stitched from fabric scraps saved during hard years, none of it had monetary value. All of it was irreplaceable. Carol knew about the storage unit. Carol knew exactly what $200 meant. It meant we had to choose between our mother's memory and our own survival. And she had made that choice feel like a gift. I looked at Cole. He was looking at the maple tree. I said, "We pay for Mom's storage first." He nodded without looking at me. We walked to the storage facility, paid the $215, went inside, and held our mother's quilt for a few minutes in the cold concrete room that smelled of dust and the particular sadness of things that used to belong somewhere. Then we walked away with $12 left between us and 2 duffel bags, and the specific silence of people who have run out of obvious next steps. We walked for a long time that first evening, past the elementary school where Cole had learned to read, past the park where our father used to push us on the swings when we were small enough to believe nothing bad could happen while he was standing behind us. The ordinary world continued in every direction. Families eating dinner, children playing in yards, windows glowing yellow and warm. It is a particular kind of loneliness being homeless in the town where you grew up, surrounded by the geography of your own life, but locked out of all of it. Every familiar sight felt like a comment on your situation. We ended up at the public library because it was warm and free, and did not ask anything of you. We found a table in the back between nonfiction and periodicals, dropped our bags, and sat down. Cole stared at the table surface. I pulled out my phone and started searching. Youth shelters capacity full. Rooms for rent deposits we could not afford. Part-time jobs that would not pay enough fast enough to matter. I was building something that kept collapsing faster than I could construct it. I did not let Cole see that. I kept my face neutral and my posture straight and my search methodical, because he was watching me the way he had watched me since our mother died, with the particular attention of someone who is taking their cues from another person. And I had decided a long time ago that the cue he would get from me was forward, always forward, whatever forward cost. It was almost 7 in the evening when my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it. I was in the middle of calculating whether we could afford a week at a motel if we ate nothing, which we could not. But something made me open it. The subject line read, "Estate of Walter Hale required communication." The sender was a law firm in a town called Millfield, Ohio. The attorney's name was Arthur Crane. I read the email once. Then I read it again slower, the way you reread something when your mind refuses to process it on the first pass. Then I slid the phone across the table to Cole. He read it, looked up at me. His face carried the expression of someone deciding between two interpretations of an impossible thing. "It's a scam," he said. I'd already opened another tab and typed the firm's name into the search engine. A real website came up, an address on a real street. A photograph of an elderly man in a brown suit standing in front of a brick building. A phone number with an Ohio area code that I called immediately, and which rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that said, in a voice that sounded exactly like the man in the photograph looked, "You have reached the office of Arthur Crane, attorney at law. Please leave a message and I will return your call." I left a message. I said my name, Cole's name, and that we had received an email about our grandfather's estate and would like to schedule an appointment. My voice was steady. I was very proud of my voice for being steady. Maybe I said to Cole when I had put the phone down, "But it's the only move we have." He looked at me for a moment. Then he pulled his bag closer. "Okay," he said. "Then what?" We spent that night at the Greyhound station because it was open 24 hours and the plastic seats were marginally less uncomfortable than sleeping on the library floor. We did not sleep. We sat shoulder to shoulder and watched the clock, and I made lists in my head of everything that needed to happen in the correct order for any of this to work. Arthur Crane called back at 8 the next morning before the ticket window even opened. His voice on the phone was exactly what it had sounded like on the recording, warm and unhurried. He said he was very glad we had called. He said the matter was time-sensitive in certain respects, but that we should come to his office at our earliest convenience, and he would explain everything in person. He said he was sorry for our losses, plural, as if he knew about both of them. At 6 in the morning, the ticket window opened. 2 tickets to Millfield, Ohio, $53. I had an emergency fund tucked into the lining of my duffel bag. Money I had saved from 2 years of part-time work at a grocery store, dollar by dollar, against some future I could not name but felt approaching. After the tickets, we had $43 left. $43 to walk into a future that might be a scam designed by someone who had heard about 2 kids left with nothing and decided that was an opportunity. The bus ride was 4 hours. The city fell away behind us in layers. Buildings gave way to warehouses, gave way to strip malls, gave way to fields. The sky went from the particular gray of urban weather to a wider, more deliberate gray that belonged to open country. Cole slept for an hour against the window. his face slack in a way it never was when he was awake. He looked younger when he slept. He looked like the 12-year-old kid who had cried at our mother's grave and then squared his shoulders and decided somewhere in those minutes to stop being the kind of person who let things break him. I did not sleep. I watched the land open up around us, and I thought about our grandfather, Walter Hale, our mother's father. The name itself was a kind of wound I had learned to work around the way you learn to walk around, a loose floorboard. Every family has things they do not discuss, subjects that live in the middle of rooms like furniture, arranged to block the view of something you would rather not look at directly. And Walter Hale was ours. Our mother had spoken of him rarely and never without a quality in her voice that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, but lived in the territory between them. She had told us he was a drifter, someone who had decided one day when our mother was still young that family was a weight he was not equipped to carry, someone who had simply walked away. We had grown up with that story baked into our understanding of ourselves. We were the ones people left. First our grandfather, then our mother, then our father. The world kept subtracting. Cole and I remained. That was the story. The bus pulled into Millfield just after noon. It was exactly the kind of town that exists in the spaces between larger towns, the kind that does not appear on mental maps unless you have a specific reason to go there. A main street with a diner, a hardware store, a feed store, a church with a white steeple, and a sign out front with a Bible verse rendered in black plastic letters, a water tower, a grain elevator visible on the edge of town against the flat sky. People moved on the sidewalks at the pace of people who had nowhere urgent to be, which is sometimes the pace of contentment, and sometimes the pace of a place that has been slowly emptied of urgency over many decades. They looked at us when we stepped off the bus. Two teenagers with duffel bags and the particular hollowed look of people who have not slept properly in several days. I felt their attention the way you feel weather. Curious, assessing, not unfriendly. The office of Arthur Crane was in an old brick building on the main street that smelled exactly as I had imagined it would, floor polish and yellowed paper, and the specific stillness of a place where difficult things were handled quietly and with decorum. The waiting area had leather chairs that sighed when you sat in them, a frame print of a landscape on the wall, a clock that ticked. Arthur Crane himself appeared in a doorway and said our names. He was in his 70s, slight and upright with kind eyes behind thick glasses and white hair, and the manner of a man who had spent decades delivering difficult news gently and had become very good at it. He shook our hands. He looked at us the way adults rarely look at teenagers, which is to say he looked at us directly with full attention, as if we were the most important people in the room, because we were the only people in the room. He led us into his office, sat across from us at a large desk covered in organized stacks of paper, folded his hands. "I want to begin by saying I am very sorry," he said, "for your father and for your grandfather. I knew Walter for nearly 30 years. He was a good man, a complicated man, but good in the ways that matter most." We did not say anything. Cole was very still beside me in the way he got still, when he was processing something he had not expected. Arthur opened a manila folder. He walked us through it in the direct, careful way of someone who respects the intelligence of the people he is speaking to. Walter Hale had died 3 months ago. He had no significant savings, no investments. He had owned one asset of any substance. He turned a yellow document toward us across the desk. A property deed. 60 acres of land 7 miles outside Millfield. A warehouse structure large, unused for many years in significant disrepair. He wanted you to have it. Both of you. His will is unambiguous. He paused in the way people pause before the part that changes the shape of the conversation. There is a complication. In his final years, Walter's health declined faster than any of us anticipated. He fell behind on the property taxes. The county has placed a lien on the property. The total amount outstanding is just over $11,000. I did not look at Cole. I looked at Arthur. "We don't have that kind of money," I said. "I know," he said. "Walter knew you wouldn't." He thought about that problem for a long time. He reached into the folder and produced a key. It was iron old, heavy, ornate in the way of things made before anyone decided that functionality and beauty were separate considerations. It looked like it belonged to something that mattered. "This opens a locker at the Greyhound station where you came from. Locker 247. Your grandfather rented it 6 days before he died and left it in my name. His instructions were specific. You were to receive this key only after you had legally taken possession of the property." I looked at the key. I looked at Arthur. "How do we take possession if we can't pay the taxes?" "The deed transfer is separate from the lien. The property becomes yours. The debt becomes yours as well." He looked at us with something that was not quite pity, because pity looks down, and he was looking straight across. "There is a processing fee to finalize the transfer according to the terms of Walter's will." He was very specific about the amount. He glanced at the paper, though I had the sense he already knew it by heart. $7. The number sat in the air between us. $7. It was so precise and so small that it felt encoded with something, a message inside the number itself. He wanted it to be something you could manage. Arthur said quietly. Whatever else was true, he wanted to be certain you could claim what he left you. I looked at Cole. He looked at me. And for the first time in 8 days, something shifted in his face. Not hope exactly. Something more like the thing that precedes hope, the decision to act as if hope might be possible. I reached into my bag and counted out 5 crumpled dollar bills and a collection of quarters. Cole added 2 more dollars from his own pocket. We pushed the small pile of money across the polished desk. $7. Arthur accepted it with the gravity it deserved. He wrote a receipt. He had us sign the transfer documents one by one, explaining each one as we went. And when it was done, when the last signature was in place, he slid the iron key across the desk to me. Just like that, we owned a warehouse we had never seen on 60 acres of Ohio farmland. We had never walked. Burdened by $11,000 of debt. We had no visible means of paying with our only path forward, being a key to a locker 300 miles away. We took the next bus back to Dayton that same afternoon. It felt strange retracing the route we had come, the landscape running in reverse, the city reassembling itself through the window as we approached. But the strangeness was overlaid with something I could not yet name, something that was not comfort but was adjacent to it, a thread thin but real connecting us to something larger than the two of us in a bus seat with $43 and nowhere to sleep. The Greyhound station smelled of cleaning fluid and stale coffee in the particular combination of those smells that belongs exclusively to transit spaces. We found the locker bank in a hallway near the restrooms, lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb. Number 247 was in the middle row. I stood in front of it for a moment with the iron key in my hand, feeling its weight, feeling the age of it before I put it in the lock. The mechanism resisted, then gave. The door swung open. Inside was a military-issue footlocker army green heavy enough that it took both of us to lift it clear and carry it outside to a patch of dead grass behind the station where no one could see us easily. There was a padlock on the hasp. Cole walked 2 blocks to a hardware store and came back with a pair of bolt cutters we paid for with money we could not really afford to spend. He worked the cutters around the padlock shank, leaned into it, and the metal failed with a sharp crack that made me flinch. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was money. Not organized, not neat. A thick roll of bills held with a rubber band, the kind of sum that announces itself by its size before you have counted a single bill. Beneath the roll were bundles of letters, yellowed envelopes tied together with kitchen twine. Beneath the letters, loose photographs, old, some black and white, some faded color. I lifted the roll of cash and handed it to Cole without speaking. He sat on the cold ground and began to count. His fingers were methodical. His face was arranged very carefully into an expression that gave nothing away. I watched him count. I watched him count again. When he stopped, he looked up at me. His voice came out barely above a whisper. $11,500. The precision of it hit me before I could think of any reason it should. $11,500. The back taxes were $11,000, which left $500 extra. Not $10,000, not $12,000, $11,500 to the dollar. He had known. He had known exactly what we would need, and he had saved it across years of odd jobs and careful living. And he had calculated it and set it aside and left it in a locker so that we would find it precisely when we needed it, and not one day before. He had been thinking about us. For years and years and years, the man we believed had walked away without looking back, had been calculating the exact cost of saving us. My hands were still. I was aware of that specifically, the fact of my hands being still when everything inside me was not. I had held myself together for 8 days through the hospital call and the funeral, and the brochures on the kitchen counter, and Carol's flat voice and the click of the lock, and I had not once let myself come apart, because Cole was watching and someone had to be the kind of person who did not come apart. My hands were very still on my knees, and my eyes were burning, and I did not do anything about either of those things for a moment. Then I picked up the bundle of letters. The string came off with one pull. The top envelope was addressed in shaky handwriting that had clearly once been careful. For my grandchildren, it said. Just that. I opened it. The paper inside was thin, the handwriting unsteady but legible. My dearest Reese and Cole, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for a great many things, and I hope by the time you finish these pages you might understand some of them. He had not been a drifter. He had never been a drifter. In 2012, Walter Hale had owned a small construction business. Legitimate, successful, the kind of business built over 20 years of showing up and doing the work correctly. He had built homes and barns and warehouses across 3 counties. He had a good reputation and a stable business and a daughter he was proud of, and 2 grandchildren, one 7 and one 4, who he loved with the specific ferocity of people who understand that time is not guaranteed. And then he had made a mistake. He had partnered on a development project with men he had not investigated carefully enough. Men who had connections to people who resolved business problems with methods that did not involve courtrooms. The project collapsed. The money disappeared. And the men came to Walter with a bill that was not denominated in dollars. They threatened him. And then they found out where his daughter lived. They knew she had 2 small children. They made it very clear what they were willing to do. He had 2 choices, he wrote. Stay and watch what happened to the people I love most, or disappear and take the trouble with me. He sold his business for cash in a matter of days, paid the men what he could, and vanished. He told our mother he had taken a job out west. She believed him for a while. Then she stopped believing him and believed instead the simpler story, the one that had no moving parts and required no mercy. That he had decided his family was not worth the effort of staying. He spent 12 years moving. Different names, different towns. Carpentry, handyman work. The kind of labor that pays in cash and doesn't ask for references. He sent money to our mother through channels complicated enough that they could not be traced back to him. Anonymous money orders, a little here and a little there. He never explained them. He could not. He saw photographs of us sometimes. A friend who had known him since before would send them occasionally carefully. Nothing that could be tracked. Cole with that serious frown you get from your mother, he wrote. And Reese with her grandmother's stubborn chin and her fierce, steady eyes. Every year I wanted to call. Every year I told myself no. The silence was the only protection I could still give you. It was the only thing I had left to offer. Cole was reading over my shoulder. I could hear him breathing. I kept reading. The men had faded eventually. Prison for some. Death for others. The threat had dispersed over years the way threats do when no one is actively maintaining them. But too much time had passed. Walter was a stranger to us. A ghost who had no reasonable right to reappear in lives that had continued without him. Lives that had suffered significantly because of his absence. And he knew it. He had no defense that would have survived the grief of our mother's eyes. And then she was gone too. And that door was closed forever. So he found another way. About 5 years ago, he had come to Millfield. He had bought the land, the 60 acres with the warehouse land. No one else wanted land. The county had nearly forgotten land that could wait. He paid the taxes faithfully every year until he could no longer work. He had spent those years in Millfield collecting things, antique furniture, vintage equipment, pieces he found at estate sales and auctions, items he restored by hand in the back of the warehouse, with skills he had accumulated over 12 years of working with his hands. He had been building something for us from a distance the way he had protected us from a distance, quietly and completely and without asking for credit. He left the money in the locker. He left the letters. He left the plans. And at the bottom of the bundle, tucked separately from the others, wrapped in a piece of cloth, I found an envelope with a single name on the front. Reese. I held it for a moment. Cole was quiet beside me. The October wind moved through the dead grass around us. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. Old, the color slightly washed, the edges worn from being handled. A man in his 60s, gray-haired and strong-faced, holding a child of about 7. The child had dark hair and was looking up at the man with an expression of complete trust. The kind of trust that is not decided but simply exists, native and total. The child was me. I did not remember it, but I knew it the way you know your own hands. The setting was the front yard of a house I recognized dimly from a photograph my mother had kept. I turned it over. The handwriting on the back was steadier than the rest. He had written it carefully with intention. You had your mother's eyes and your grandmother's stubbornness. The day I left you were the last thing I looked back at. You were standing in the yard in a blue coat, and you were watching me go. And your face was so serious, like you were trying to understand something that didn't make sense yet. I knew then, even then, that you would be the one to hold everything together. I'm sorry I made that necessary. I'm sorry for all the weight you carried that should have been mine. I love you. I always did. I always will. Whatever you decide to do with what I've left, do it for yourself, not for me. You owe me nothing. All my love always. Grandpa Walter. I folded the photograph and held it in both hands for a long moment. The wind was cold. The sky was getting dark. Cole sat very still beside me. Then I put the photograph into the inside pocket of my jacket. Against my chest where I could feel it, I stood up, brushed the dead grass off my knees, looked at Cole. My voice when it came was level and forward-facing because there was a direction we needed to move in, and standing still was not it. Let's go see what he left us. My grandfather built a plan precise enough to account for 12 years of absence. He calculated the taxes to the dollar. He mapped the legal strategy before anyone had a reason to use it. He thought through every obstacle we would face and prepared a counter to each one. What he could not account for, what neither of us planned for, was how many people would try to take it from us, including someone we trusted. The bus back to Millfield left at 7 in the morning. We had paid the $215 for our mother's storage unit from a separate fold of the cash, handled that first, before anything else, because some things are not negotiable regardless of circumstance. The remaining money was divided into 3 portions and distributed across our bags in the way that people who have had nothing learn to protect what they suddenly have. We did not sleep on the bus. We sat with the footlocker between our feet and watched Ohio move past the windows in the gray early light, the fields wide and flat and beginning to show the first hard frost at their edges. Cole did not talk much on the ride. He was reading the letters again slowly, the way you read something the second time, when the first reading was too much to fully absorb. I watched the landscape and thought about the 60 acres we were riding toward, and the warehouse we had never seen, and the $11,000 in taxes we were about to pay to a county office on behalf of a man we had only just begun to know. The county assessor's office was a low brick building 2 blocks off Millfield's main street. The woman behind the counter had the particular efficiency of someone who has processed countless transactions involving properties in various states of distress and feels no particular emotion about any of them. She took the cash, counted it, stamped the paperwork, and handed us our copy without looking up. Just like that, a debt that had been accruing across the final years of our grandfather's life was resolved. We walked out into the cold morning air with $453 left and a deed that was fully ours. The property was 7 miles outside town. There was no bus route that went that direction, which we had already established, so we walked. The road moved through town, and then away from it. Asphalt, becoming gravel, becoming dirt. The houses growing farther apart until they stopped appearing altogether. The land opened up on both sides, fields stretching to the horizon, under a sky the color of old pewter. Our breath came out in small white clouds. Our bags were heavy. We walked without speaking for a long time, which was not unusual for us. Cole and I had always communicated efficiently in the way of people who have spent years sharing limited space and had learned which silences were comfortable and which were not. This one was comfortable. We were moving towards something. That was enough. We saw the warehouse before we saw the gate. It sat in the middle of a cleared area surrounded by 60 acres of overgrown grass and trees gone skeletal with November. The structure was enormous, a long, low building of corrugated metal, its surface a patchwork of faded red paint and advancing rust. The roof had a visible sag toward the center. Every window was either boarded over or broken. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, bent in several places, the wire gone slack. It was not beautiful. It was large and tired and in significant disrepair, and it smelled even from a distance of metal and time. But it was ours. The specific legal documented fact of that ownership felt strange and enormous, like a word in a language I was still learning to speak. The gate was held by a rusted chain and a padlock. Arthur Crane had sent us away with a ring of keys and specific notes about which one did what. The third key I tried worked. The padlock fell away. I pushed the gate open and it screamed against the gravel, carving a long, curved arc in the driveway surface. We stood on our own land. I let Cole go through the gate first. He stood on the other side for a moment with both hands in his jacket pockets looking at the building. And something moved across his face that I did not try to name because some things need to stay private, even between siblings. Then we walked toward the warehouse together. The main door was a regular steel door set into a much larger roll-up panel. Faded blue paint, most of it gone. The fourth key on the ring. I put it in and turned it and pushed the door inward, and a wave of cold, stale air came out to meet us. The smell was dust and rust and something else beneath that, something older and more specific. The smell of a place that had been waiting. We stepped inside. The darkness was total at first, with only the rectangle of light from the doorway behind us, and a few shafts coming through the skylights 40 feet above. Filtered through years of grime into something barely distinguishable from the surrounding dark. As our eyes adjusted, the scale of the space became apparent. It was cavernous, The ceiling was a complex web of steel beams and trusses lost in the shadows above. The concrete floor stretched out in every direction, vast and littered with debris. Along one wall, old workbenches sat buried under years of accumulated dust. In the center of the floor, the ghost outlines of where heavy machinery had once been bolted were still visible. Cole exhaled slowly. He said, "It's definitely big." That was his version of finding something to say when there was nothing adequate to say. I almost smiled. We explored the building for the better part of an hour, moving through it with our flashlights from Arthur's inventory of supplies, casting light into corners and along walls. In one far corner, partially concealed by a collapsed shelving unit, we found what Walter had described in his letters. A section of the warehouse that was different from the rest. Cleaner, more deliberate, with new electrical conduit running along the wall, and fresh lumber framing partially erected. He had been building something here. The bones of it were visible. The intent was clear. In the opposite corner, we found the office. It was a small room built into the structure, its windows opaque with filth, its door unlocked. Inside, a metal desk, a metal chair, a wall calendar still open to March 2019 with a photograph of the Tennessee Smokies above the grid of days. Someone had been here working, planning. The desk had a shallow drawer that stuck when I tried it and then released with a second pull. Inside were pencils worn to stubs, a tape measure, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a receipt from a lumber yard in the next county. And below all of that, a small, flat book, its cover worn smooth. A journal. Walter's handwriting, page after page of notes, measurements, calculations, sketches. Which walls were load-bearing? Where the water lines ran? How to restart the old generator in the back room? The load capacity of the roof trusses? The specifications for the electrical sub-panel he had begun installing. He had not just bought this land. He had been studying it the way you study something you intend to transform. We cleared the desk, wiped it with the sleeves of our jackets, set up the propane heater in the corner of the office, laid out our sleeping bags on the floor, and ate granola bars for dinner in the thin light of the battery lantern. The heater ticked and hissed. Outside the office walls, the warehouse groaned in the wind with the sound of a large animal settling. This is where we decided to stay. Not because it was comfortable, because it was ours, and because there was no other option. And sometimes the absence of other options clarifies things considerably. The next morning, I woke before Cole and sat at the desk with the journal and Walter's letters spread in front of me. I read through the journal, systematically making notes on the back of the lumber receipt, because there was no other paper. By the time Cole woke up, I had a list on a piece of cardboard I had torn from the side of one of our supply bags. 5 items. Secure the building. Water. Power. Heat. Income. It looked simple, written down. It felt impossible in practice. I kept those 2 facts in separate compartments and worked from the first one. We walked into Millfield that morning. The diner on the main street was called Rosie's Red Vinyl Booths. The smell of coffee and bacon grease embedded in every surface. We ordered 2 coffees and shared a plate of eggs, and split the cost precisely because $453 was not money that allowed for imprecision. The man behind the counter at Vernon's Feed and Supply was not Vernon. He was a man named Leland Dyer, and he was in his middle 60s with the weathered, deliberate quality of someone who has spent most of his life outdoors doing work that matters and knows it. He had large, careful hands and eyes that assessed you the way a person assesses a structural problem, looking for where the weakness is and what it would take to shore it up. We told him we had inherited the old property on Route 7, the warehouse. He put down the inventory clipboard he had been holding. He said Walter Hale's grandkids. It was not a question. You knew him. Cole said, everybody who's been in this town more than 5 years knew Walter. Leland came around the counter and stood in front of us. He was tall and took up space without being aggressive about it. Quiet man. Kept to himself mostly, but good. Real good. He had a way of showing up when people needed something done and not making a production of it. He paused, looking at us with something that was not pity, but was a close relative of concern. What are you two planning to do with the place? I told him. I did not soften it or inflate it. We were going to live there while we fixed it. We were going to start a business restoring the furniture and equipment Walter had collected. We needed supplies and we had limited money, and we needed to know who in Millfield could help us with electrical and plumbing work. Leland listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me for a moment the way people look at you when they are deciding something. Then he started pulling things from the shelves. Flashlights, work gloves, a better propane heater, a longer extension cord, 2 boxes of contractor trash bags. He set them on the counter and waved off the wallet I reached for. First purchase is on the house, he said. Walter helped me through a bad winter 3 years back. Showed up with a truck and 2 days of his time and didn't ask for a dime. This is me settling a debt that needed settling. He folded his hands on the counter. I've got a friend, Odell Briggs. Retired electrician, 72 years old. Knew Walter well, helped him with some of the wiring out there a couple of years ago. Man's been bored since he retired. I'll send him your way if you want. His wife Ruth came out of the back room while we were still talking. She was a small, solid woman with white hair and an immediate warmth that filled a room the way heat fills a room evenly and without effort. She looked at us and said, Have you two eaten anything besides granola bars today? Cole opened his mouth and she held up one hand. Don't answer that. Come back here at noon and I'll have something ready. We went back at noon. Ruth had made chicken and dumplings thick and hot, and she set it down in front of us without ceremony, and then sat across the table and asked questions about where we were from and how we had come to be here, and what we remembered about Walter. She listened to the answers carefully. When we told her about the letters and what they had contained, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said I had a feeling about him, the way he worked on that property, like it was for someone, like he was expecting someone. Odell Briggs came to the warehouse 2 days later, just as Leland had promised. He was 72, compact and deliberate, with a white beard and hands that trembled slightly, but moved with the unconscious confidence of 50 years of skilled work. He walked through the warehouse the way people who know buildings walk through them, pausing at specific points, running a hand along a conduit run, clicking his tongue at certain junctions and nodding slightly at others. He found the plans Walter had drawn up for the living space in a rolled tube behind the false panel. At the back of the desk, exactly where Walter's journal had said they would be. He spread them on the desk and put on his glasses and was quiet for several minutes. 2,000 square feet, he said finally. built into the northwest corner, separate electrical sub-panel already roughed in, plumbing stack already run to within 10 feet of where the bathroom needs to go. He turned a page. He did the load calculations himself, every one of them. He shook his head slowly. I've been an electrician for 50 years, and I've never seen plans this thorough put together by somebody who wasn't trained for it. He looked up at us. He talked about you two sometimes. Not often, but when he did, you could see what it cost him. The missing of you. He folded his glasses and put them in his shirt pocket. He wanted this to work. I'd like to help make it work if you'll have me. We said yes. We said yes without hesitation. The rhythm of those first weeks was hard in the specific way that physical work in cold conditions is hard. The kind of hard that gets into your bones and stays there, that makes you ache in places you did not know could ache and sleep without dreaming from sheer exhaustion. Cole and I worked during the days on the visible problems, clearing debris, boarding broken windows, learning by trial and error. And Walter's journal the basics of what needed to happen and in what order. Odell came every other day and worked on the electrical rough-in with the focused precision of a man who had no patience for anything done incorrectly. Leland stopped by regularly with supplies always at cost or below. Ruth appeared periodically with food in cast-iron pots that she set on the propane burner, without comment, as if this were simply a thing she had decided to do, and the decision required no further discussion. We were not alone. The realization of that landed differently each time. Derek Voss arrived on a Tuesday morning 11 days after we had moved in. He came in a black pickup truck, polished to a shine that was wrong for a gravel road, and he wore a suit and shoes that announced he was accustomed to floors that did not have debris on them. He was in his 40s, dark-haired, with the easy bearing of a man who had been told yes enough times that no still surprised him. He extended his hand when he reached us and introduced himself as a representative of Ridgeline Development Corporation. He was pleasant. He was very pleasant. He showed us a figure in a folder and explained clearly, and without apparent aggression, that the county had plans to expand the road that ran past our property, and that this would significantly affect land values in the area, and that Ridgeline was positioned to handle the complexities of development in a way that two people without experience in commercial real estate would find difficult to navigate on their own. The figure was $100,000. I looked at the number. I looked at Derek Voss. I said no. He blinked. The pleasantness held. "Perhaps you'd like to think about it," he said. "Take a few days." "Our answer is no," I said. "This land belonged to our grandfather. It belongs to us. It is not for sale." He studied me for a moment the way people study things they intend to come back to. Then he said he understood completely and hoped we would reach out if our thinking changed. And he got back in his truck and drove down the dirt road, and I watched the truck until it disappeared around the bend at the edge of the property. Cole came to stand beside me. "Think he's done," he said. "No," I said. He wasn't. 4 days after Derek Voss's visit, Inspector Harmon arrived at our gate. He was a lean man with a clipboard and a digital camera, and an expression of professional neutrality that had been deployed so consistently it had become indistinguishable from his actual face. He introduced himself, showed credentials, said he had received a complaint regarding unpermitted habitation of a commercial structure. He walked through the warehouse for 90 minutes. He was methodical and thorough, and said almost nothing. He photographed the exposed wiring in the sections we had not yet addressed. He photographed the absence of fire suppression systems. He documented the inadequate emergency exits, the lack of proper insulation, the condition of the roof. When he was done, he met us outside and handed me a document. His voice was flat and informational. You have 90 days to submit a remediation plan to the county. The estimated cost of bringing this structure into full compliance with current commercial building codes is approximately $340,000. If you are unable to present a viable remediation plan within that period, the county will initiate condemnation proceedings. He said, "Have a good day," and walked to his car and drove away. I held the document and read it twice because reading things twice is a habit that developed from years of making sure I understood exactly what I was dealing with before I responded to it. $340,000. That evening, Cole came and sat beside me in the dark of the warehouse after Odell had gone home, and the propane heater was the only light. He was quiet for a while, and then he said carefully, "Maybe we should think about it, Reese." I knew what he meant. He did not have to say the name. I stood up. I picked up the lantern and walked to the far wall of the office where we had tacked Walter's letters up alongside the drawings, a kind of map of everything we were working from. I found the line I was looking for and pointed to it without speaking. Cole came and read it. "What you build on it is your decision." He didn't tell us what to build, Cole, I said. He said it's our decision, not theirs. Not Ridgeline's, not the county's. Ours. Cole was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. And that was the end of that conversation. But I knew he was scared. I was scared too. I was scared every single day in a way I did not discuss with him because he was 16 years old, and he had already been through enough. And part of my job was to be the floor he could stand on when everything else was uncertain. That job required that I not let him see how uncertain I was about the floor itself. Court Marsh had been helping us for 3 weeks by the time I found out. He was a plumber in his 30s who had shown up one Saturday morning saying Leland had mentioned we might need someone and he had some free weekends. He had worked well and without complaint and had not asked us for anything in return, and I had trusted him in the uncomplicated way you trust someone whose actions have given you no reason not to. I was crossing the main floor of the warehouse on a Thursday afternoon when I saw him standing in the far corner near the section with the most significant code violations, holding his phone up in a way that was not casual. He was not making a call. He was photographing the exposed wiring, the structural gap in the east wall, the section of roof where water had come through during the last rain and stained the concrete below. I stood still for a moment. The specific coldness that moved through me was not anger exactly. It was more like the feeling of a calculation completing. I walked across the floor toward him. He did not hear me coming until I was close. He dropped the phone to his side and turned around, and his face told me everything before I said a word. "How much did they pay you, Court?" I asked. He did not answer. He could not quite meet my eyes, which was also an answer. "Get off our land," I said. "Don't come back." He left without speaking. I stood in the spot he had vacated and looked at the corner he had been photographing and thought about how the violation reports had escalated so specifically and so quickly after his arrival. How Harmon had documented things that were not visible from any approach other than the interior of the building. Ruth was there that afternoon. She had come by with food and had been in the office when it happened. When I came back in, she was standing at the desk with her hands folded. She looked at me and then she crossed the room and put one hand on my shoulder. She did not say anything. She just left her hand there for a moment. I did not move away from it. I stood still and let it be there. Then I said, "We need to keep working," and she said, "Yes, we do." And we did. Cole came back from Leland's store an hour later. He put down the supplies he had been carrying and looked at my face and said, "What happened?" I told him about Court. He listened with his jaw tightening incrementally. When I finished, he said, "We should lock the gate. We should stop letting people in." I looked at him. He knew before I said it that that was the wrong answer, because I could see him working it out even as the words left him. "If we stop trusting people, Cole," I said, "we become exactly what Ridgeline wants us to be. Alone and isolated and easier to wear down. The answer to Court is not to close the door. The answer is to be more careful about who we open it for." He thought about that. Then he said, "Okay," and started putting the supplies away. Derek Voss found Cole alone at Leland's store the following week. I was not there. I had sent Cole for hardware and stayed at the warehouse to meet Odell about the sub-panel installation. Cole came home and told me about it immediately the same evening without any preamble or softening. He said Derek had approached him in the parking lot and made an offer of $350,000. He had called Cole the smart one. He had called me emotional. He had suggested that Cole was doing me a favor by convincing me to sign. Cole had said nothing to Derek Voss. He had finished loading the supplies and driven Leland's borrowed truck back to the warehouse. He stood across from me in the office and gave me the account in full and watched my face while he did it. I was quiet for 3 full breaths after he finished. Then I said, "He went to you 'cause he knows he can't move me." "That means we're winning." Cole looked at me for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly, more like the arrival of a perspective he had not previously had access to. That night I could not sleep, not because of Court or Derek Voss or the $340,000 estimate or the 60 days remaining on our deadline. All of those things were present and real, but I had put them where I put things I could not solve before morning, which was in a contained space in my mind that I had built and maintained since I was 13 years old. Because a 13-year-old who has just lost her mother and has a 10-year-old brother looking to her for evidence that things can be managed learns quickly where to put the things that cannot yet be managed. I was restless with something else. Something I could not name yet. I got up at 2 in the morning and took the flashlight and walked out into the main floor. I had done this before in the weeks we had been here, moving through the building in the dark. The way you move through a place that is becoming familiar, learning the sounds it makes, and the way it settles, and the particular quality of its silence. I found the warehouse had a kind of presence at night that was different from its daytime character, slower and more patient, as if in the absence of activity it returned to something essential. I moved to the far end of the building, a section we had not fully explored, where old storage shelving had collapsed and the floor was littered with the debris of decades. I was picking my way through it when my boot caught on something. A section of the concrete floor that was not continuous. A seam where there should not have been one. I crouched down, ran my hand along it. The section moved. Not much, but enough. I used a piece of rebar from the debris pile to lever it up. Underneath, set into a carved-out space in the subfloor, was a metal box, not locked. I lifted it out and sat on the cold floor with my back against a support column and opened it. Inside, papers. Bank statements, property correspondence, county notices. And beneath all of that, a thick envelope. My name on the front in the same hand that had written the letters and the notes in the journal, and the words on the back of the photograph I carried against my chest. Just Reese. Nothing else. I opened it in the beam of the flashlight and began to read. The handwriting was steadier than the final letters had been. This was written earlier when he still had more time than he would have later. It read with a different quality, less the urgency of a man finishing things and more the deliberateness of a man who has thought carefully about what he needs to say. Reese, I know you're the one reading this alone, probably in the dark while Cole is asleep. You always stayed up so others could rest. That's your mother in you. It was in her too, that specific, exhausting generosity. The inability to stop holding things together, even when you needed someone to hold things together for you. I want to tell you something I should have said in person across a kitchen table. The way grandfathers are supposed to say things. I'm sorry that I can't. I want you to know what is in this box. Below these papers there is a full account of the furniture and equipment I have collected and restored in the back section of the warehouse where the tarps are covering the work. I started collecting 5 years ago. Estate sales, mostly some auctions. Pieces that were worth something if someone took the time to care for them properly. I took the time. There is a handwritten inventory and my best estimate of current value. As of last year, the collection was worth approximately $50,000. It is the seed of what I meant for you to build. I also want you to know that what you are building here is not just a business or a home. It is the answer to a question I have been carrying for 12 years. The question of whether what I did was worth it. Whether leaving to protect you was the right choice or only the choice that felt like the right one in a moment of terror. I cannot answer that for you. Only what you do with what I've left can answer it. I believe you are going to do something remarkable with it. I have believed that since you were 7 years old and standing in the front yard in a blue coat, watching me drive away with an expression on your face that I have carried every single day since. You were not crying. You were watching. You were already trying to understand. That's who you are, Reese. You are the one who tries to understand things all the way through, even when the understanding costs something. I love you. I am proud of you. I was always proud of you. All my love, always. Grandpa Walter. I sat with that letter in my hands for a long time. The warehouse was silent around me. The flashlight made a circle of light on the floor that contained the letter, and my hands and nothing else. Then I stood up, picked up the metal box, and walked back through the dark warehouse to the office where Cole was sleeping. I stood in the doorway for a moment looking at him. 16 years old and already carrying more than most people carry at 30. I set the box down on the desk. Then I crossed to where he was sleeping and put my hand on his shoulder and shook him gently awake. He surfaced quickly the way he always did, always alert, always ready. I found something I said. You deserve to read it too. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, looked at my face and then at the box on the desk. He got up without asking questions and came and sat beside me. And I handed him the letter and watched him read it in the light of the lantern. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, $50,000. Yes, I said. He looked up at me. That's enough for the renovations. It's enough for the renovations and a start, I said. But first we need someone who can keep Ridgeline from using the county to take it from us before we get there. He nodded. His jaw was set. He looked less like a 16-year-old at 2 in the morning than like someone considerably older who had arrived at a conclusion. I need to call someone in the morning, I said. A lawyer, Leland mentioned. Willa Pruitt. Okay, Cole said. We sat at the desk together in the lamplight with Walter's papers spread in front of us, the inventory, and the plans and the correspondence, the full account of what our grandfather had built for us. Outside the warehouse, the Ohio night was cold and dark and enormous. Inside, the propane heater ticked. The lantern burned. I traced a line on one of Walter's drawings with my finger, the outline of the living space in the northwest corner. The 2 bedrooms, the small kitchen, the bathroom, the main room with its planned wood stove. He drew all of this, Cole said quietly. He designed everything I said, every single piece of it. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then why didn't he come back? After the danger passed. Why didn't he just come back? I thought about the photograph against my chest, about the expression on the face of a man driving away from a 7-year-old girl standing in a blue coat in a front yard, about 12 years of cash sent through untraceable channels and photographs received through careful hands, and the weight of a love that had no safe address to be delivered to. Because some distances, I said, once you've opened them, become their own kind of wall. And because he thought we were better off not knowing the truth. And because he was wrong about that, but right about everything else. And people are complicated that way. Cole nodded slowly. We sat together in the lamplight a little longer. Then I said, get some sleep. Tomorrow we start the last part. He looked at me. What's the last part? I looked at Walter's drawings at the 60 acres and the warehouse and the plan that had been waiting for us all along. The part where we prove he was right to believe in us, I said. My grandfather built a plan so precise, it accounted for 12 years of silence, 12 years of distance, 12 years of loving people from a position where love had no direct line of delivery. He calculated the taxes to the dollar. He mapped the legal angles before anyone had a reason to need them. He collected and restored $50,000 worth of furniture by hand in the back of a warehouse he would never live in for 2 grandchildren he had not spoken to in over a decade. What he never planned for, what neither of us planned for, was how fast a town could move when it decided 2 kids were worth fighting for. The morning after I found Walter's box, I called Willa Pruitt from the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, while Cole ate breakfast inside. Leland had given me her number the week before, with the specific recommendation of a man who did not give recommendations carelessly. She works out of Hargrove, he had said, 2 towns over. Handles cases where people are getting pushed around by money. good at it. Doesn't need you to be able to pay her regular rates." She answered on the second ring. I told her the situation in the order that mattered not chronologically but by weight. The property. The lien we had already resolved. The $340,000 remediation estimate. The timeline of Ridgeline's offers against the timeline of the county's escalating enforcement. The complaint we believed Court Marsh had been paid to manufacture. The 90 days that had become 60. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence that felt like calculation rather than hesitation. "Come in tomorrow," she said. "Bring everything. Every document, every letter, every county notice. And bring your grandfather's plans." Her office in Hargrove was on the second floor of an old commercial building, spare and organized bookshelves along every wall. A desk covered in stacked files that suggested volume of work without suggesting disorder. Willa Pruitt was in her early 40s, dark-haired with the kind of focused stillness that belongs to people who have learned to think faster than they speak. She wore a plain gray sweater and no jewelry except a thin gold ring, and she looked at the documents we spread across her desk, the way a person looks at a landscape they have navigated before and recognize. She read for 20 minutes without speaking. Cole and I sat across from her and did not fidget, which took effort. When she looked up, her expression had shifted into something that was the professional equivalent of satisfaction. "Your grandfather was smarter than their entire legal team," she said. "I know," I said. "Now help me prove it." She leaned forward. "What Walter designed is not a commercial renovation. It is a residential live work unit constructed within an existing agricultural storage structure. Those are two completely different regulatory categories with two completely different sets of requirements. The county's $340,000 estimate applies to bringing a commercial structure into full commercial compliance. That is not what you are doing. What you are doing falls under a separate classification with significantly lower thresholds." She tapped one of Walter's drawings. "If we get the residential unit approved under the live work classification, the county cannot condemn the property as long as you are making demonstrable good faith progress on the residential section. The remainder of the warehouse reverts to agricultural storage, which has minimal requirements at this scale." She looked at me directly. "He knew the loophole before they knew they'd use it against you." "That is exactly what he did," I said. She filed the permits that week. She submitted the reclassification application with Walter's drawings attached as primary documentation. His careful measurements and load calculations and material specifications doing exactly the work he had intended them to do. Ridgeline pushed back immediately. A counter-filing arrived within 4 days, disputing the classification, citing precedent, requesting an extension of the review period. Willa answered each one with the calm efficiency of someone who had anticipated every move because she had seen them all before. The deadline was still running. 60 days had become 45. We worked. The days had a shape now that the weeks before had lacked. We were up before light, working by lantern until the sky came gray through the skylights. Then working by daylight until we lost it. Then working by lantern again until our bodies stopped cooperating. Odell came every other day, and the electrical rough-in advanced in steady increments, each connection made with the care of a man who understood that the difference between work done correctly and work done quickly was the difference between something that lasted and something that didn't. Cole had become competent with drywall. in the way that people become competent at things when the alternative is not having a place to sleep. And the framing Walter had begun was filling in with walls that were not perfectly square, but were solid and plumb, and would hold what was put on them. My hands cracked from the cold and the work. The skin at my knuckles split and bled, and I wrapped them at night with the medical tape we kept in the first aid kit, and unwrapped them in the morning and went back to work. Ruth noticed and brought a jar of salve that smelled of beeswax and insisted I use it. I used it when she was watching. She knew this and said nothing about it. We sold the first piece from Walter's collection on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after I'd found the inventory. A solid oak workbench from the 1920s, 8 feet long mortise and tenon joinery, the top scarred with a century of honest use in a way that made it more beautiful rather than less. Walter had cleaned and oiled it and reinforced 2 of the leg joints and left it under a canvas tarp in the back section of the warehouse. I had photographed it and posted it with a description and a price of $800 and the name Hale Restoration, because that was the only name it could have been. A man from Columbus called within 2 hours. He drove 3 hours on a Thursday to pick it up. Paid cash, loaded it into his truck with Cole's help, and before he drove away, he stood looking at the piece strapped into his truck bed, and then looked back at the warehouse and said, "What else do you have in there?" I said, "Come back in a month. Bring a truck." He did come back. He brought a larger truck. The news of what we were doing spread through Millfield, the way news spreads in small towns, not through any single announcement, but through the accumulation of individual conversations, Leland mentioning it at the hardware store, Ruth talking after church, Odell telling people who asked why he was spending so much time out on Route 7. The story carried its own weight. 2 kids, the old Hale property, a grandfather who had prepared everything from a distance. People in small towns have a particular relationship with that kind of story. They recognize in it something they understand about legacy and land and the specific kind of love that does not announce itself, but shows up in the work. On the first Saturday of December, I woke at 6 to the sound of engines on the dirt road. I came out of the office into the main warehouse floor, still pulling on my jacket, and went to the door and opened it. There were trucks at our gate. 6 of them, then 8, then more, turning off the road, parking along the fence line. People climbing out. Men and women in work clothes carrying tools. 2 of them wrestling a sheet of plywood out of a truck bed, another lifting a toolbox. A woman setting up a folding table near the gate with a coffee urn and a stack of paper cups. 23 people. I counted later when the day was over. 23 people from Millfield and the surrounding county who had decided without being asked in any organized way that this was a Saturday worth spending on Route 7. Leland was at the front of it, directing the arrival of materials with the ease of a man who has organized physical labor many times and knows how to read a space and allocate people within it. He came to where I was standing in the doorway and looked at me, and then looked past me at the partially built living space in the northwest corner. "Walter's drawings," he said. "I got them." We spread them on the makeshift table and Leland studied them for 10 minutes and then began assigning people to tasks with a specificity that made clear he had already reviewed the drawings before this morning, that he had come prepared. 2 men who had spent their lives building agricultural structures took charge of the remaining framing. A retired contractor named Roy Hutchkins walked the perimeter of the living space with the eye of someone who had built things from the ground up for 40 years and said solid plan and began working without further comment. Cole was beside me when the work started, and I felt him go still with something that was not surprise exactly, but a quality of recognition, like seeing something confirmed that you had not quite believed before you saw it. I went to work alongside everyone else, not supervising, not coordinating, working, carrying materials, holding framing while it was fastened, handing tools, learning what I did not know from the people who knew it, and applying it immediately. There is a specific satisfaction in physical work done in company, the rhythm of it, the way a group of people working toward a shared visible goal develops a kind of collective momentum that individual effort cannot replicate. By noon, the walls of the living space were standing. By mid-afternoon, the ceiling joists were in. Ruth's coffee urn was refilled twice, and the food she and two other women had organized moved through the crowd, and people ate standing up and went back to work. Cole was hanging drywall in the afternoon with a man named Harland, who was 68 years old and had done it for 30 years, and corrected Cole's technique twice and complimented it once, which Cole told me later was the best ratio he had ever encountered. Derek Voss drove past at 3 in the afternoon. I did not see the truck until it had already slowed to nearly a stop at the gate, and by then I had straightened from the work I was doing and was watching it. The black truck sat at the gate for a long moment. 23 people moving over the property, lumber, going up tools, running the particular organized noise of people doing work that is going to produce something. Derek Voss's face was not visible behind the windshield, but the truck itself communicated everything that needed to be communicated about what this scene meant for Ridgeline Development Corporation's timeline. Then the truck moved on. It did not stop. It did not come back. Odell was standing beside me. He said, without looking at the road, "I think that fellow just realized something." "What's that?" I said. "That this stopped being about money a while back," he said. "And he's just now catching up." By the end of that weekend, the structure of the living space was complete. In the weeks that followed, the systems went in. Odell oversaw the electrical with the focused care he brought to every inch of it, checking each connection twice, labeling every circuit in the sub-panel in his careful block handwriting. A plumber named Gareth Wills, who had heard about the project through Leland and showed up one Saturday with his tools and an apology for not coming sooner, ran the water lines and set the fixtures and got the water heater working on a Wednesday afternoon that felt like a minor miracle. Leland came one weekend and spent an entire day installing the wood stove in the main room, a cast iron unit he had sourced from a estate sale 2 counties over. And when he lit it for the first time that evening, the heat it put out filled the small space immediately. And Cole and I stood in front of it with our hands out like people who had forgotten what warmth felt like, which we more or less had. Hail restoration was growing. Word had spread beyond Millfield and into the surrounding counties through the furniture collector networks that Cole had spent evenings cultivating online posting photographs of Walter's pieces with descriptions that told the truth about their provenance and condition and the work that had gone into them. We sold 7 pieces in 6 weeks for a total of just over $4,000. We hired 2 people from Millfield, a woman named June, who had refinishing experience, and a young man named Theo, who did not but learned fast. We began attending estate sales on weekends. Cole driving Leland's borrowed truck looking for pieces that Walter would have recognized as worth saving. The workshop in the back section of the warehouse was cleaned and organized and lit properly. Workbenches set up, tools hung, the smell of wood and oil and finish replacing the smell of dust and rust that had been there when we arrived. The warehouse that had seemed defined entirely by its decay was revealing itself as something else, a space large enough to hold whatever we were willing to build inside it. Willa Pruitt filed the last of the compliance documentation 2 weeks before the inspection date. She called me afterward and said, "We've done everything correctly. The classification is solid. The progress documentation is thorough. The filings are in order." She paused. "Your grandfather's plans are going to be the decisive factor. They demonstrate intent that predates the county's enforcement action by years." "That's significant. Is it enough?" I asked. "It should be," she said. "But inspectors have discretion. So we do the work correctly and we show up on the day and we see." I told her about Walter's journal, about the notes he had made about which inspectors were most likely to present problems and how to address their specific concerns. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Your grandfather really did think of everything, didn't he?" "He tried to," I said. The inspection was scheduled for the second Thursday of January. The living space was complete by then. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a main room with the wood stove, and 2 windows we had reglazed ourselves. The floors were not perfectly level. The walls were not exactly square. These were the kinds of imperfections that honest work produces when honest work is done by people who are learning as they go. But every system was correct. Every connection was sound. Every material met or exceeded the specified standard, because Odell had made that his personal requirement, and no one had argued with him. The night before the inspection, I did not sleep. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that I could not make myself stay in bed past midnight, and I gave up trying and went and sat in the main room of the living space, with the wood stove burning low, and Walter's letter in my hands. Not reading it, just holding it. The weight of the paper was familiar now. Cole found me there at 1 in the morning. He sat down across from me without asking why I was up or offering the kind of reassurance that neither of us had ever been very good at giving or receiving. He just sat there. The wood stove ticked. The warehouse was quiet around us. After a long time, he said, "You know what he would say right now if he were here." What I said. Cole thought about it. "Probably something about checking the permit documentation one more time," he said. I almost laughed. I actually almost laughed, which felt like something significant given where we were. "He'd be right," I said. "He was usually right," Cole said. "About most things." We sat there together in the warmth of the wood stove until the sky outside the high windows began to lighten from black to gray, and then I got up and started coffee, and we got ready for the day. Inspector Harmon arrived at precisely 9 o'clock. He drove a gray county vehicle and parked it at the gate and walked to the door of the living space without looking at the rest of the property, which suggested he was here for a specific purpose and intended to fulfill it without distraction. He was, as I remembered him from the first visit, lean, neutral-face clipboard in one hand and camera in the other. The practiced blankness of someone who inspects things for a living and has learned to withhold visible reaction as a professional discipline. Willa was there. Odell was there. Leland and Ruth were there, standing slightly back from the entrance, Cole stood beside me at the door. Harmon nodded to us and stepped inside. What followed was 2 hours of the most concentrated silence I have ever experienced. He worked through the living space methodically, room by room, system by system. He tested every electrical outlet with a polarity tester he carried in his shirt pocket. He ran every faucet and checked under every fixture for leaks. He measured the thickness of the fire-rated drywall in the hallway with a tool I had not seen before. He examined every smoke detector, every carbon monoxide alarm, every emergency egress window, opening them and measuring the clear dimensions against whatever standard lived in his clipboard. He checked the clearances around the wood stove. He measured the pitch of the bathroom drain. He wrote on his clipboard continuously. He did not speak. He did not make the small sounds that people make when they are satisfied or unsatisfied with what they are seeing. His face gave nothing. We stood in the main room, those of us who were there, and we did not speak either, and we did not move more than necessary. And the 2 hours passed the way time passes when the outcome of something important is being determined by a process you cannot influence slowly and with great weight. When he was done, he stood in the middle of the main room. He looked at the wood stove and the reglazed windows and the floor Cole and Leland had laid, and the kitchen Ruth had helped us wire, and the walls we had hung in the cold of November, with our hands cracking and our breath coming out white. He looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "I have been doing this job for 23 years, he said. His voice was the same flat informational tone it had always been, but something in the pace of it was different. I have seen a great many renovation projects. I have seen people cut corners in ways that were creative and in ways that were simply careless. I have seen minimum compliance, and I have seen work that met the standard and nothing beyond it." He stopped. He looked around the room one more time. "This is not minimum," he said. "This is quality work. Work that was done correctly, not because it had to be done correctly, but because the people doing it decided it would be." He shook his head slightly, a small motion that seemed involuntary. "I don't know how two people your age built something like this, but you did." He reached into his folder and produced a green sticker. The certificate of occupancy seal pre-signed with the county stamp. He pressed it to the inside of the main room window with a deliberate motion, smoothing the edges with his thumb. "This unit is approved for residential habitation," he said. He picked up his clipboard and camera and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at us over his shoulder. "For the record," he said, "I never received any formal complaint about this property." He held my gaze for exactly one beat. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. I stood in the middle of the room with the green sticker on the window, and the sound of his footsteps receding across the warehouse floor. And I understood what he had just said. Not the certificate of occupancy. The other thing. The specific, deliberate statement of a man who had been handed a situation he had not chosen and had found a way to do the right thing within it quietly, in language that could not be challenged, but could not be mistaken either. He had made his choice, and he had made it in the only way available to him, and he had walked out before anyone could make it complicated. Ruth's arms came around me from behind, both arms pulling me back against her. And I let that happen because Ruth was the kind of person whose embrace was not an offer, but a statement of fact. And arguing with facts had never been my strongest skill. Cole was beside me and she pulled him in too, and held us both and said quietly, and with total conviction, "Welcome home, you two. Welcome home." Odell was looking at the window. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with his shirt. He said something under his breath about the dust from the drywall getting into everything. Leland shook my hand, not the way adults shake teenagers' hands with a quality of condescension built into the gesture, but the way he would have shaken the hand of anyone who had done a difficult thing correctly. He looked me in the eye when he did it. We threw away the letter from Ridgeline without opening it. It arrived 4 days after the inspection. The Ridgeline Development Corporation letterhead, visible through the envelope window. Cole picked it up from the ground near the gate where it had been dropped and carried it inside and set it on the desk. We looked at it for a moment. Then I put it in the trash can without breaking the seal. Cole watched me do it. Neither of us said anything because some things do not require comment. Spring came to Millfield the way spring comes to that part of Ohio slowly. And then all at once the fields moving from frozen gray to the tentative green of early growth. The trees recovering their leaves in stages, the sky opening up from its winter compression into something wider and more generous. The 60 acres around the warehouse, which had been dormant and skeletal all winter, began to show what they were beneath the dormancy. Wild grass in the fields, a stand of old apple trees at the property's eastern edge that bloomed in the second week of April, in a way that seemed almost theatrical, as if they had been saving it. Birds in the tree line. The warehouse itself looked different in the spring light. The rust on its walls, which in October had read as decay, read now as something else, as the record of a long life, as the mark of time that had moved through and over a thing that had remained. It had a kind of presence in the landscape that a new building would not have had, the presence of something that had survived being left and was now being found again. Hale Restoration had a showroom in the southern section of the warehouse by April, a cleaned and lit and organized space where Walter's restored pieces were displayed the way they deserved to be, with room around them in good light, with small handwritten cards describing their provenance. People came from the surrounding counties and from Columbus and twice from as far as Cincinnati. A journalist from a regional magazine came and spent a day photographing the space and talking to Cole and me, and wrote a piece that described the warehouse and the story behind it, in language that I thought was accurate without being sentimental. The piece ran in May, and the response to it doubled our inquiry volume in a week. We hosted the first monthly market on the first Saturday of May. 8 vendors, local artisans, and craftspeople set up in the main warehouse floor around the perimeter, their tables and their work filling the space with a noise and color and human presence that the building had not known in years. People came from Millfield and beyond. Ruth sold jam. A woodworker from the next county had a table of hand-turned bowls. A woman who restored vintage textiles had a display that drew a crowd. Cole managed logistics with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything. And by the end of the day, he had a system in his head for making the next one larger and better organized. And he told me about it on the drive back from returning Leland's truck. It was Willa who handled the paperwork for Walter's remains. They had been held by the county for months, unclaimed while the estate was in limbo. She navigated the bureaucratic process with her characteristic efficiency. and in late April we received authorization to take custody. Leland built the box from a piece of white oak he had been keeping for something worth keeping it for, clean-jointed and sanded smooth, simple and solid. We buried him on a Saturday in the last week of April, under the old oak tree, at the eastern edge of the property at the place where the field met the tree line. And you could see the warehouse and the 60 acres. In one view, the whole of what he had built and left, and what we had found and continued. The grass was green. The apple trees were past their peak bloom, but still holding the last of it. The sky was the particular clear blue of a spring day that knows it is being noticed. The whole town came, or enough of it that the distinction did not matter. They came in their trucks and their cars, and they stood in the field in the spring light, and they were quiet in the way people are quiet when they understand that something real is happening. Leland spoke about friendship, about what it meant to know a man for 5 years without knowing his full story, and to find out after he was gone that the story made him more worth knowing, not less. He said Walter had the quality of showing up when it mattered, without making you feel that his showing up was anything other than what he wanted to do, which was a rarer quality than most people realized, and a more valuable one. Odell spoke about work, about the specific dignity of a man who learned a trade in the second half of his life and practiced it with the care of someone who understood that the things you build outlast you and should therefore be worth outlasting. He said Walter's wiring was some of the cleanest he had seen in 50 years of the trade, and he meant that as the highest compliment he knew how to give. Ruth read a passage from Psalms in a clear, steady voice that carried across the field. Then it was my turn. I had the letter in my pocket. The last one, the one from the box under the floor. The one written in the steadier hand of a man who still had time when he wrote it. I took it out and held it for a moment in the spring light. Cole was beside me. Willa and Leland and Ruth and Odell and the people of Millfield were arranged in the field around the oak tree and the simple box Leland had made. The warehouse stood behind us, its rust-colored walls warm in the afternoon light. The green certificate of occupancy sticker still visible on the window of the living space. From this distance, a small bright mark against the old metal. I began to read. I read the parts about what he had left us and why. I read the parts about the silence and what it had cost him. I read the part about believing in people from a distance, about how love does not require proximity to be real, about how the most important things he had ever felt, he had felt while looking at photographs of 2 children he could not call. My voice did not break. I had promised myself it would not. Not because I was ashamed of what it would mean if it did, but because I wanted the words to land clearly. I wanted every person standing in that field to hear them the way they were written without interruption. And then I reached the last lines. I paused, not because my voice was failing, because the moment asked for it, because some words deserve the space around them. I looked out over the 60 acres, the green fields stretching to the tree line, the apple trees at the eastern edge, the warehouse with its rust and its history and its new green sticker, and the sound faint from here of the business running inside it, the evidence of what we had made from what he had left. I looked back at the letter. This land is the last piece of our family I read. It is the only thing I have to give you, a piece of earth that belongs to you. What you build on it is your decision. I folded the letter and held it in both hands and stood at the grave of a man I had only known through his words and his work and his specific, enormous, silent love. The spring wind moved through the field. The grass bent and recovered. The weeks after the burial had their own quality, quieter and more settled than anything that had come before. Hale restoration continued to grow in the way that things grow, when the foundation is correctly laid steadily and without drama each week, slightly more than the week before. June and Theo had become reliable and skilled. Cole was managing the online presence and the estate sale sourcing with an efficiency that made me occasionally forget he was 16. I was handling the accounts and the vendor relationships and the ongoing development of the showroom. And at night I sat at Walter's desk in the living space we had built from his drawings and did the numbers by lamplight, the way he must have done his numbers alone and deliberately with the specific satisfaction of understanding exactly where things stand. One afternoon in May, I found Cole sitting on the small porch we had built off the main room of the living space, looking out over the property. He had one of Walter's letters in his hand. He did not look up when I came out and sat beside him. The sun was low, and the light it made across the 60 acres was the warm amber of a late afternoon in a good season. "Do you think she knew?" Cole said after a while. "He meant our mother." I thought about it honestly, the way I try to think about things. The money orders she had never explained. The way she had spoken of Walter, not with hatred, but with the particular exhausted sorrow of someone who has given up trying to understand something rather than someone who has understood it and found it unforgivable. Maybe, I said. Maybe she suspected something. Maybe she decided it was easier not to know the truth than to live with it. Cole nodded. He looked at the letter in his hand. "I used to hate him," he said. "All those years I thought he just left. I built a whole story around it, about what kind of people we were, the kind people leave. I knew that story. I had built the same one. And now," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Now I think about a man who spent 12 years alone working cash jobs and living in rooms the size of this porch, sending money he couldn't explain to a daughter who didn't know why it was coming." He paused. "That's not someone who left. That's someone who stayed in the only way he had left." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what it is." The light moved across the field. Somewhere in the warehouse behind us, the business was running, the sounds of it familiar now, June's voice, and the rasp of a plane, and the smell of finish coming through the open door. The monthly market was 2 weeks away, and the vendor list was full, and Cole had designed a simple printed map of the space that he was unreasonably proud of and that I had told him was very good, because it was. I had the photograph in my jacket pocket. I carry it always. Walter holding a 7-year-old girl in a blue coat in front of a house in summer. Both of them caught in a moment neither of them knew was the last of its kind for a very long time. I took it out and looked at it in the afternoon light. Cole leaned over and looked at it with me. He had seen it many times by now. He looked at Walter's face the way the man was looking at the child he was holding, with an expression that was not complicated at all, that was in fact one of the simplest and most legible things I had ever seen on a human face. Cole said you think he'd like what we did with the place. I looked at the photograph, at Walter's eyes, at the specific quality of attention in them, the way he was looking at that 7-year-old girl, as if she were the most important thing in the landscape. I think he already knew we would, I said. The sun moved lower. The field held the light the way fields do at the end of a good day, evenly and without hurry, as if there is no reason to rush the transition from one state to another when the current state is this. Cole went back inside after a while. I stayed on the porch. I have thought often in the months since we came here about the click of the lock, the sound that ended one life and began another. Carol could not have known, standing at that door with her envelope of $200, that she was not ending anything at all, that the click of the lock was not a closing, that it was the sound of everything beginning. We were loved. We were always loved. The love was just taking a form we had not been taught to recognize, arriving in cash in unmarked envelopes and iron keys and old plans tucked in a tube behind a false panel, in a warehouse on 60 acres of Ohio farmland that a man had spent 5 years preparing so that 2 people he could not call would have somewhere to land when they needed it most. A piece of earth that belongs to you. What you build on it is your decision. We made our decision. We made it on the cracked concrete porch of the only home we had ever known. With 2 duffel bags and $12 and the sound of a lock in our ears. We made it every morning after that in a cold warehouse with our breath coming out white and our hands cracking, and our grandfather's plans spread on a metal desk. We made it when the trucks came and 23 people got out with their tools and their time and their uncomplicated belief that this was a thing worth doing. We made it when the green sticker went on the window, and when the oak box went into the ground, and when the first piece sold, and the first market ran, and the first morning we woke up in our own home, on our own land, and the word home meant something it had never quite meant before.